Hey everyone, hi, it's your girl Eunice. Welcome to part two of on our GRC session. This is an ongoing playlist and it will go concurrently with the FISMA or the RMF playlist that we have. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, this is a must known concept, right? When you are thinking of switching to cybersecurity, GRC, these are some of the core regulatory frameworks that you need to know and understand. And I'm so happy to bring this to you all. And the goal here again is to give people the foundations, the basic, right? You can't just jump to the different ISO, to the 701 and all that series without understanding the law itself. Because before we could talk of all these other frameworks, these are laws that they've already make it mandatory that organization want to be in adherence to the different laws and GDPR that govern the European Union. But I tell you what, a lot of companies, even here in the US, I've seen companies that not necessarily house European citizen data, but they also choose to go with a GDPR or ISO 27001. So again, as I said, this is to give you all a good foundation and start building your knowledge from beginners, right? So before you realize it, to intermediary and if possible to advanced knowledge, right? So, and don't forget to like our channel, don't forget to share with your friend, don't forget to comment. And if you have any question, put it in the comment section. I would definitely be, I would definitely get back to you. Okay. So that being said, we will continue where we stopped last time. We're just gonna go with we'll continue with principle two. If you realize with principle one, what happened is the fact that we spoke about unlawfulness, we spoke about fairness as well as transparency, and we spent so much time talking about consent, talking about contracts, making sure that people need to give their consent before you could collect their data. Yeah, so people need to give their consent before you could collect their data, right? But if you look at what Principle 2 says, that purpose limitation. Purpose. What's the purpose? What's the reason of you collecting the data? Okay. And it means that that collection should be limited for that purpose and purpose alone. Okay. And this also really align with the privacy as well as PTA as per NIS and FISMA. It definitely align with it so well, right? For example, the purpose limitation principle ensures that personal data is processed only for specific purpose it was originally collected for, and data must be collected for a clear, explicit purpose and only processed if it aligned with that purpose. I remember even like when we discussed in the previous video, we said that even when you are collecting the data, it has to be explicit in a clear language that the individuals can understand, even if it means in their own language, right? So you don't just go and be collecting people's information like that, right? And then we'll say, but what happened if the purpose change? Say a purpose, the reason of you collecting that data, if that purpose change, will you just don't even care? Will you just go ahead and just, abuse the fact that you have people's data and just be doing whatever thing you want to do? And that's why GDPR actually put this. And in a situation where a purpose change, then the organization wants to perform an assessment, right? You want to be able to assess to see if it's compatible with the original purpose. And remember, as we discussed earlier, if that purpose change, then you need to give a separate consent, right? The fact that I give you my initial consent on that particular purpose, if that purpose has deviated, right? If it deviates from the original purpose, then of course, because you want to again to check if it's fair, have fairness be demonstrated, transparency, and it's also unlawful. So those are the kind of things that you want to check to make sure that fairness is being demonstrated. How fair is it? Does it affect or have any negative impact on that individuals? Those are the kind of things that organization needs to check. Say, do you see fairness and reasonable expectation? The new purpose should be one that the individual reasonably expect their data to be useful. And assessment should consider whether the change in purpose could have a negative impact on the individual's privacy. So do you see something that I expected? And that's why I said reasonably expect. So and each time it changed, does it have any negative impact on that person? Right? So again, this is just to tell you how strong and important these policies are. Original purpose, for example, let's say is that a company collects personal data, for example, name, email, purchase history from customer to fulfill orders and deliver products. And this is a typical example of a contract, right? Which makes sense because if I want to go to Amazon website, I would definitely, if I want to make a purchase, they need this information to be able to deliver the goods, right? Yes, I will put in my name, I'll put in my email address, actually even my home address, right? That way they have to deliver, they have this information, even the purchase history for them to fulfill the orders and also to deliver that product. But what happened if that original purpose have changed? Say, for example, the company decide to use this information for marketing purposes. So the company decide to use the collected data because they already have that data, right? They already have access to that data. So can they just work on like, you know what, we already have this data. It's not crime of us just sending somebody an email, promotional emails, newsletters. Do you guys receive that? Right. And also they might also have your phone numbers. If you have your number, can they just be sending you something that you never bargained for? Something that you never gave your consent for them to be sending such promotional emails? This is the reason of us, like again, considering principle 2, purpose limitation. Is the new purpose compatible with the original purpose? The company needs to assess if marketing was something that customer reasonably expected when they first provided their data. Since the original purpose was to fulfill orders, marketing might not be immediately expected by the customer. Do you see? Again, that's why they said they need to fulfill to make sure, was it something that a customer reasonably expected? Was that something that I expected when I first, at the initial phase, when I went to that website, I put my information. Was that something that I gave them my consent? Did I give my consent in the first place? If I didn't, right? And that's why it says that since the original purpose was to fulfill orders, marketing might not be immediately expected by the customer. That was not something that I expected. So what is the company supposed to do? Can they still go ahead and send these promotional emails, or do they need to have a separate consent? Because the purpose of which, or the reason why they collect such information, it has changed. So what are they supposed to do? I hope it's making sense. And that's why I want to talk about fairness. The company needs to evaluate the fairness of using the data for marketing. Remember, principle 1 again talk about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Would this change in purpose negatively affect the individual's privacy? What's privacy for you? Right? Privacy is not all about that your data is gonna be breached or something unsolicited. Just like your house, you lock your house, you're home. Don't want people knocking at your door and someone just barging in. That's why we talk about privacy, right? For example, does a customer want to receive unsolicited promotional emails? Or would it feel like an intrusion? That's a question for you. What do you think? I would like to know in the comment section. Reasonable expectation. If the customer's expectation was simply to receive their purchase, the company might need to seek separate consent for marketing purposes, ensuring it aligns with customer reasonable expectation. And that makes sense because if it was something that I just want my purchase, then the company needs to have a separate consent. So you can't just, you know, blend or combine with something that I never bargained for. I never gave you my consent. And that's why the company needs to do that, right? And that's why we talk about reasonable expectation. But there are also cases where you might have special categories, for example, like in health or criminal offense data. And reason be that this area seek to collect very sensitive information, criminal information that can even have potential consequences, for that particular individuals, say if that data get exposed. And that's why it's important to protect people's right, people privacy, where you have those sensitive information. It just makes sense or critical and important for organization, whosoever it is, to be able to make sure that they are being safeguarded or protected. Let's say, for example, a research company or organization want to process personal health data. For example, we have medical history, we have treatment records for medical research, or medical research study on a new drug, which makes sense. They want to produce a new drug and they will definitely need access to this information. So would they just go and be collecting information? What would they really do? Right? Health data is classified as a special category under the GDPR, which require extra protection because of its sensitive nature, right? So the research organization must assess the potential consequences for the individual if their data is used. For example, would the data expose sensitive conditions or impact the individual's privacy? So come to think, if somebody has certain diagnosed things that they want to keep it for themselves, and they get exposed. Remember last time we also mentioned of psychological impact, right? Stigmatization. If something like that get exposed, then it might definitely impact that person because it's all about not just protecting your data, but even your physical, psychological, mental health, right? And that's why we keep talking about privacy. So look at privacy on a like holistic overview, like in a broader scope, not just narrow-minded, talking about security and all those things. It takes everything that can affect, a human being. Okay. For example, the organization must implement appropriate safeguards such as anonymization. You have to anonymize data or pseudo-anonymization, right? Where you are doing that to be able to mitigate or reduce the risks. So anonymization is just a way, for example, if you have my information, you change that, just anonymize it, play around with it, give it fake information. For example, Eunice, instead of Eunice, you might have something else. That way it's not traceable to Eunice. It cannot trace me, right? And that's why when you have sensitive information like that, it's important for organization to anonymize the data. That way you reduce or mitigate the security risks, or also making sure that such data can or could only be accessed by authorized personnel, right? Those involved in the research, of course, accountability, confidentiality. We also have access control, so make sure it can only be accessed by the rightful individuals, and also obtain explicit consent from the individuals, right? Ensuring that they fully understand how their data will be used. Because it's not about you wanting to carry out research and you're using my data without me giving you any form of consent. So you need to also obtain explicit consent from the individuals before you can use their data. But why extra care is needed? Reason being that we've already discussed that health data, if mishandled, if misused, could definitely lead to discrimination, stigmatization against individuals, right? And that's why it's important for organizations to implement best practices, security controls like data encryption. You encrypt that data, right? Again, you limit access as that confidentiality is being obtained. Okay, you also limit the access, and then you also get, make sure you have, clear consent so as to protect the person right. So you also want to make sure first it's being communicated in a clear manner, and then also have an explicit consent from that individual. So do you see? So on top point two, we already talk about data limitation, right? So I hope now this is making sense, right? Even with the limitation, we also have to talk about fairness and transparency and all those things, right? So you see, one was about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Two, talk about purpose limitation. What if that purpose change? What are you going to do? And three, we are talking about data principle. Three, we're talking about data minimization. Now, if you see the difference between purpose limitation, you limit it based on the purpose, the original purpose that you allow or warrants you to collect data. But now we are talking about data minimization. collect just the data that you need. Making sense? I hope so. Minimization means collecting only the personal data that is necessary to fulfill the specific purpose stated, just that data necessary to carry out the purpose. For example, this principle ensures that business doesn't collect data, excessive data, but rather only what is adequate and relevant. And if you all watch the PT and PIA video that we had, this is something that was covered, right? Because before you even prepare or have a PIA document, privacy impact assessment document, or SOP, you want to be able to conduct your PTA, that's privacy threshold analysis. And you also have to put the purpose, specify the kind of data. So you can't just go and be collecting. And if you are collecting people's social security number, then you need to also document the laws that allows you to collect such information. And that's why GDPR will also make it a mandatory step that organizations should collect only the data that they need to carry out whatever function or purpose there is. But why data minimization is important? Excessive data collection is a common practice, especially in this era. Everybody using tool, everybody using whatever thing they want to use. But the GDPR requires that businesses demonstrate the need for each piece of data collected if the data cannot be justified, right? So they need to also demonstrate the need of each and every data that is being collected. Let's take a simple example of data minimization. Let's say an online store asks for customer name, shopping address, payment data to process an order. First, the minimization here is that the store should only collect the data required to complete the transaction, as we have discussed earlier. You need that data, name, address, and payment information. This is just what you need to carry out this purpose, right? But non-minimization, just imagine instead of asking this information, they start asking you of sensitive information, your date of birth, your employment statuses, your marital statuses, your how many children do you have, your social security number. Is it necessary? It's not, right? It's not necessary. And that's why we say that they need to be able to collect just the data that they need to complete that particular transaction. And excessive data is beyond the scope, it's outside the scope of GDPR minimization principle. And each and every data that you collect also need to have a specification, as a rationale as to why you need that particular data. So collect only what is necessary for the task at hand, justify the need for each data pair, I already covered that, and be prepared to explain why it is needed. You see, yes, it's the same thing too with FISMA and FERM. Whatever data that you're collecting, you also have to justify the needs, right? Especially you start collecting like a lot of sensitive data. Why do you need that data, right? And that's why you need those documentation. Do you have those controls? Believe by now you now start seeing how fast cybersecurity is, or GRC wireless. People are just talking GRC from one end or GRC, but it is a very broad field, right? So ensure that unused or unnecessary data is not being collected, stored, or processed. Do you see? Ensure unused. If you're not using that data or unnecessary data, don't even collect it in the first place. Neither can you even process or store it. Okay? Again, these are very important steps. And then, so you see, so we've already spoken about step 1, step 2, and step 3. Step 1, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Step 2, purpose limitation. Step 3, data minimization. And step 4, we're talking about accuracy. Tell me, we are imperfect human. Are you not prone to mistakes? Tell me about it, right? Won't you want your information to be corrected? And if it has to be corrected, would it take forever to be corrected? And that's why we are talking about accuracy, step 4, that personal data must be accurate and kept up to date. Inaccuracies that are relevant to the purpose of processing must be corrected or erased without delay. Yes, if you made a mistake, then make sure that data needs to be corrected without a delay. Importance of accuracy, I believe by now everyone knows, right? Accurate data is critical for marketing reliable decision. Of course, those data analytic, if your data is not accurate, then you definitely can be wrong decision making, right? So you need accurate data, especially in big data analysis or profiling. If you have wrong data, remember profiling, that has to do with your behavior. If you have those data, even in healthcare system, if you have inaccurate data, then you might also like doctor might issue like wrong diagnosis that can even result to the loss of life, right? And that's why it's important to make sure you capture the right data, because just say, for example, I'm allergic to certain medication and that they didn't even realize it and put it there. That's like, you put the data that once I know, like once I take that medication, I can die, right? And that's why it's important for organizations to also make sure that they have the most accurate information and people can also correct their information in a timely manner. For example, inaccurate data can lead to wrong conclusions, and this can have serious consequences, especially in sensitive areas like healthcare or finance. Tell me about it in finance. Oh my gosh, dealing with people money, right? So, for example, say a healthcare insurance company uses an individual's data to assess their eligibility and premium rates. If the data contain errors, e.g., incorrect medical record, history or age, it can result in unfair decision like charging higher premiums. Tell me about it. Just imagine that's like your health insurance. I think we all know, right? Each time when you're taking those things, you have your premium, you check which one do you want to go with, depending on, if you have to frequent the hospital, doctor's visit, you can go for a higher premium, right? And this can even go when you have like an accurate data. But imagine having an inaccurate data, then this can be some of the consequences. Well, better still, auto insurance nowadays, right? Imagine having an incorrect information that you, God forbid, that you had multiple accidents. That would just inflate your premium rates, right? And these are some of the things that organizations still want to make sure they have the most accurate information, even in like for mortgage. If you are trying to get a new house, you need to have the most correct information because you are creating worthiness. What if they have an incorrect information? That might not, it might lead to discrimination because you might not even qualify to purchase your house. And this is why it's important again for organizations to have the most accurate data, right? And they said that the insurance company must ensure that the data is accurate and promptly corrected to avoid negative impacts on the individual. Profiling, we talk about profiling already. Again, involve the use of data to predict an individual's behavior, preferences, or trends, right? Inaccurate profiling data could lead to unfair treatment or discrimination, especially when the data is used to make critical decisions related to health, finance, and employment. We already spoke about that, right? Do you see how this thing all makes sense? So talking about that, now we're gonna go with storage limitation. So step 4, after accuracy, you have the most accurate information. Remember, I talk about limitation, data minimization. But organization collects all of this data. Where are they gonna keep the data? That's another big question. And that's why we talk about storage. In as much as you're collecting all this data, at the end of the day, they are being stored in the database. And that's why personal data must only be stored for as long as is absolutely necessary to fulfill the purpose for which it was collected. Once a purpose has been fulfilled, the data should be deleted or anonymized. You get? So collect that information just as you need it. If you don't need that data, make sure you delete it or you anonymize it. Make it such that it is not traceable to that individual. Change it, play around with it with fake information, but the data is actually real, right? Apply best security measure if you don't want to delete it, right? Those are all security controls. You are anonymizing, you are protecting, you are safeguarding that person's privacy right. You are protecting their information. But what are some of the exceptions for data retention? Example, data can be archived in certain situations, archived like stored, right? Say for public interest, which has to do with government records, research related to history or science. Of course, they can have that statistical analysis, but in these cases, data should only be kept as long as necessary for the public purpose and must be safeguarded properly. There are times that you even have, maybe visit different hospital, do stuff. Some would say that their archival period or retention period is 7 years. So they can keep that information after 7 years. You can come and get it. If you can't get it after 7 years, then you're gonna destroy it. So same principle applies here. So even when data is retained, the individual rights and freedoms must be protected. You see, remember we talk about anonymization, pseudonymization. Yes, even when you store that information, again, they have their freedom and make sure they are being protected. Appropriate technical and organization measures should be put in place to ensure data is secure and do not misuse during storage. So even when it's being stored, you have, make sure it's being protected, have best encryption algorithm like AES 256 to store data at rest, but make sure they are being stored and they are being protected. Let's see a typical example. A retail store collects personal data to process a purchase. Once the purchase is complete, the store should only keep the customer's data for the period necessary, for example, for returns or customer support. After this period, the data should be deleted or anonymized unless it is legally required to retain it. For example, tax records, right? So unless it is required that they need to file their tax at the end of the year, or maybe like quarterly or whatever, then but once that is done, then make sure if you have to delete that data, make sure it should be deleted and also make sure it's been anonymized. Then last one, which has to do with integrity and confidentiality, right? We all know what integrity is. I know what confidentiality is. Integrity, make sure data is not being modified, it's not being tampered. And of course, we've been talking a lot of like anonymization and other things, just encryption, protecting people's information, and confidentiality, which has to do with encryption. Make sure that unauthorized or prevent unauthorized access to data. And then unlawful access or accidental loss, destruction, or damage. So all of these actually fall under the canopy of integrity and confidentiality, unauthorized disclosure of personal data. We spoke on that already, right? And also make sure that organizations will have appropriate technical and organization measures, to put in place to protect people's data from threats, right? Prevent any potential risks that your organization might be exposed to, and also demonstrate compliance with data protection law as we are discussing GDPR. So it's important. And also with that, data controllers, you hear the word controllers, data, people controlling that data. So they also need to assess, different risk factors, internal risks as well, external risks to personal data. So you're not just focusing on external world, but you also have controls, like access controls to prevent unnecessarily privileges or access to data. So again, they need to assess both the internal as well as external security risks. And risk factor must be mitigated by implementing appropriate controls, again, based on the risk level. And if you all realize when we were categorizing information system, you're categorizing to come up with a risk level. What's the potential impact level? Is it a high system? Is it a moderate system? Is it a low system? Once you've identified that, then you can determine, risk factor or level. A company stores customer personal data in an online database. The company implements encryption, access controls, and regular backup to protect the data. You see, compliance, regular security audits, and you see, first, the company implement encryption, access control, and regular backup to protect the data. You need to do that. And each time you are also doing your backups, you are also make sure those backups are being protected. Because it's not a matter of me just protecting everything, and then when I back it up, I do not protect. We've seen situations of data breaches where some organization failed to encrypt their data in Amazon S3 bucket, and they got hacked, right? So these are some of the things that, again, it's not just about certain things, but to make sure these are being protected. Compliance: regular security audits and security assessment are conducted to ensure the company is compliant with data protection laws, right? And I'll say this brings us to the end of um, this. I'll end right here and then take the next session. Let me see if I can stop. Yeah, so I'll end right there. Keep it short, but it will take some time to understand GDPR rule. And then next video, I'm gonna take it. I might split it, in chunks. Go to the accountability aspect, but make sure that you watch this video, follow, try and understand. If it means taking down notes, doing some research, you can go to Google Scholar to even get some nice articles that you can read. Just do that. Again, knowledge is powerful. So I'll see you people in the next video. And do not forget to like, share with your friends and family, and also comment. Bye. So I'll see you all.